Welcome to 168 Online TV. Today we're going to interview Ambassador James Warlick, former U.S. co-chair of the OSCE Minsk Group. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your program.
Mr. Ambassador, let's start with the most pressing topic for our region. Armenia and Azerbaijan conducted an active negotiation process for almost a year under the auspices of Brussels and the USA. At this stage, the Armenian authorities announced that they also agree with the Russian proposals. Moreover, recently Nikol Pashinyan announced that Armenian side offered to sign a framework agreement during the last ministerial meeting in Washington. There is a perception and an impression that the Western process is failing. In general, how do you assess the negotiation process under the auspices of the West?
Well, I'm glad to see that the parties are engaging on a framework and an ultimate settlement. That's what's important. None of these issues are easy. They're going to take time to work out, and it's very encouraging to see that Washington is engaged on this, as well as the Europeans and, of course, Moscow. Ultimately, it's the responsibility of the Armenians and the Azerbaijanis to come to an agreement, and they simply need to work through those issues in good faith.
What do you think? At the end of this year, will we manage to sign a so-called peace treaty?
Well, you know, I don't believe that a comprehensive peace treaty is possible in the short term. I think there are issues that need to be worked through first. One important issue, of course, especially for the Armenians, is the status of Nagorno-Karabakh going into the future. But there are other issues as well: communications, natural resources, refugee issues. All of these need to be worked out. One important issue that still needs to be resolved is the actual Armenian-Azerbaijan border. And I think that it's important to avoid future conflict to resolve that issue, and there are ways to do that should be acceptable to the parties.
As you have correctly mentioned, one of the heaviest issues is the status of Nagorno-Karabakh. Now the process goes in the direction where Nagorno-Karabakh must sit on the negotiation table with Azerbaijan. When Azerbaijani president announces that people of Karabakh are citizens of Azerbaijan, what kind of status do you find secure for Nagorno-Karabakh people? And to your mind, what kind of status can we get in this format, Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan negotiation mechanism?
Sure. I think President Aliyev, I don't want to put words in his mouth, is speaking to the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. And his view, at least, is that Nagorno-Karabakh is a part of sovereign Azerbaijan territory. And certainly that was clear in his mind with the conflict. Now, that does not mean that there should not be a negotiation over status for Nagorno-Karabakh. And that's what needs to be happening, as well as the discussion of the other issues, because all of these issues need to be dealt with at the same time. The status issue is one that will need to protect the rights of the residents of Nagorno-Karabakh, to ensure, their protection for the future. I fully understand that the people of Nagorno-Karabakh are going to be very suspicious of living under Azerbaijani rule. And that's why it's important that this discussion about status take place. And it needs to be guaranteed by the international community. This is not something that is simply for Azerbaijan and Armenia. That's why it's important to have the United States, Europe, the Russians, the Turks involved in ensuring that there is some status. So I fully understand, and I've heard the de facto foreign minister of Nagorno-Karabakh speak to this issue that the Azerbaijanis cannot be trusted. Well, in the United States, President Reagan had a saying, trust but verify. And the way that we verify in Nagorno-Karabakh is that whatever agreements can be reached will be guaranteed by the international community.
Mr. Ambassador, to your mind, the door for the self-determination is closed?
No, I don't believe so. This is a complicated issue, but the people of the basic principle, the Helsinki principles, still stand, and one of those important principles is the right to self-determination, and the Azerbaijanis have always accepted that. Now, exactly what that means in the Nagorno-Karabakh context needs to be agreed with the Azerbaijanis and include a discussion with the so-called authorities in Nagorno-Karabakh, as well as the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. This is an important decision, and their future is in the hands of this negotiating process.
Mr. Ambassador, authorities of Armenia believe that future peace treaty and the process must have not only mediator but also guarantor or guarantors, because Nikol Pashinyan insists if there is not guarantor, then theoretically and practically it's possible to sign a peace agreement, and 12 hours after that a war may start. Will the US be ready to be a guarantor?
Well, I can't speak for the United States, but Prime Minister Pashinyan is absolutely right that there needs to be an international guarantee for whatever agreement is reached. I believe that there need to be international peacekeepers on the ground, and not just Russian peacekeepers. I believe that there needs to be a commitment to providing some kind of peacekeeping force. That doesn't necessarily mean armed troops, but there needs to be that kind of international presence to guarantee the peace. And I believe that Europeans and others should be participating in that force. I think it was a mistake for Prime Minister Pashinyan to say that he welcomes Russian peacekeepers for the next 2 decades. Well, how can he say that when there's not the kind of framework or peace agreement in place? I would say before you decide on the peacekeeping force, there should be that kind of framework and ongoing discussions about the issues that we just mentioned.
Mr. Ambassador, do you find it constructive to negotiate such a complex conflict at such a difficult stage of geopolitical relations, both in the West and in Russia, playing in both fields? Isn't it risky?
Well, it is a complicated time, and it's especially complicated for the Russians. It appears that the meeting of the 2 leaders in Sochi was a productive one. Now, we don't know what happened behind closed doors, but the fact that the leaders agreed to the non-use of force to resolve the conflict in the future is significant. And I believe that the Russians did put issues on the table of real importance, like status and protection of the population of Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, the discussions that are taking place, Washington, Sochi, and elsewhere, it's very difficult to know. And as a negotiator myself in the Minsk process, I can tell you that a lot does happen behind closed doors. I think from the outside, we should be encouraged that these discussions are taking place, especially during a time when we see the kinds of international turmoil that are happening today. And it's not just Ukraine. There are a lot of issues happening around the world that are taking the focus away from a conflict, like in the South Caucasus.
Am I understanding right that the status of Nagorno-Karabakh people is the point where there can be a consensus between Russia and the West?
Well, I think so. Look, I believe everyone wants to protect the rights of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, their status within Azerbaijan needs to be very clearly and carefully defined. And that needs to be the subject of the ongoing negotiations. But that can be done. I think even if you put this to President Aliyev, he'll say that he is committed to protecting the rights of the people who are resident in Nagorno-Karabakh. We don't want to see a resumption of conflict, and I don't believe that any of the parties want that to happen and would prefer to see this resolved peacefully at the negotiating table.
During the last 6 months, especially, there has been an unprecedented interest towards Armenia-Azerbaijan process from the part of the USA. We see phone calls from the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, ministerial meetings in United States, Washington, New York, even a meeting at the White House. What is the cause of such interest from the USA at this stage? Or do you have an impression that Armenia is trying to change his foreign political orientation from Russia to the West?
Well, I'm very encouraged to see the U.S. engaging on these issues. I think during the Trump administration, there were other priorities. And frankly, at the beginning of the Biden administration, there were other issues as well. The United States has a long-standing interest in resolving the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Armenia is a good friend and has been for a long time. As you well know, there's a large Armenian American community throughout the United States. We also have very good relations with Azerbaijan, and it's not just about energy issues. We've long cooperated with them on in other areas, for example, on terrorism. So we don't want to see those two countries in conflict with each other. You know, for the people of the region, there would be nothing better than to see a lasting peace that could bring real peace and security to the people. And I think with that would come prosperity. A lot of resources, human and financial, have been expended for this conflict. And that's very sad. I hope that there will be a day when we can see Armenians and Azerbaijanis living side by side in peace and security. I hope that there will be a day when we see relations and open borders, and that includes also with Turkey. This is not a dream. This is possible, and the negotiating process needs to move forward in good faith. So I would urge some patience, but I would also urge both Prime Minister Pashinyan and President Aliyev to recognize the value that peace can bring to the region and work towards that.
Mr. Ambassador, this week State Department Senior Advisor for Caucasus negotiations and OSCE Minsk Group co-chair from USA, Philip Ricker, said during the hearing at the US Senate Foreign Affairs Committee that the mechanism of the OSCE Minsk Group no longer works, and we have reached the point where we can put an end to that mandate through consensus, adding that the mandate was still quite useful. To your mind, are we close to ending the mandate of the OSCE Minsk Group, or there is a chance to restore this format?
Well, I think it's up to the parties. Right now, President Aliyev absolutely rejects the co-chair process. and will only deal with the U.S. Special Envoy. If that's his continuing position, it's true then that the co-chair process will not continue as we've seen it in the past. But take this point. What's really important is not the negotiating format. It's that the negotiations take place in good faith. And if they can happen in some other way, through the Europeans, through a third party, through maybe a completely new mechanism, great. Let's see that happen, and let's work with whatever works. I believe that the co-chair process could continue productively, even with the Russians and the issues that they have in Ukraine. I believe that, at least in Nagorno-Karabakh, we're committed to the same thing. I believe that the process could work, but ultimately it's up to the parties.
One question related to the period and to the time when you were co-chair. Nikol Pashinyan says that before his administration, previous authorities recognized Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan. My question is, during your time, you had the impression that authorities of Armenia, especially you were working from Armenia with Serge Sargsyan and Edward Nalbandian, they were recognizing Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan. What do you think about this?
Well, I think what we were trying to do, we weren't trying to get the Armenians or the Azerbaijanis to make flat statements that can be open to misinterpretation. We wanted, as co-chairs, to set out principles that could build for a lasting settlement. Now, each side was taking its own view, of course. President Aliyev would always, make clear that ultimately this is a conflict involving territorial integrity. He continues to hold that position. The long-standing position of the Armenian side is that Nagorno-Karabakh has a right to self-determination based on many, many things, history, perhaps being very high on that list. And, we respected that. You cannot just take out one issue like territorial integrity and say that's going to be the basis for the settlement, because there's more to it than that. And we continually referred to the Helsinki principles as our guiding principles and that was both territorial integrity and self-determination, as well as peaceful resolution of the conflict. And that still should be the guiding light for negotiations for the future.
Mm-hmm. So you think that Armenian authorities still have a chance to fight for self-determination of Nagorno-Karabakh people?
Well, the issue there is what exactly do they mean by self-determination? Right now, President Aliyev has made very clear that Nagorno-Karabakh is not going to be an independent state. It will not be a country, as some people, I believe, would like it to be. He's made clear that Nagorno-Karabakh is an integral part of Azerbaijan. That said, they still have a right to self-determination, and that's what needs to be defined. That's the whole issue of status. How can that status be provided in a way that's acceptable to all the parties? And of course, as you see, it's not easy, and we knew that. We knew that, for decades.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
At the end, I want to remind that our guest was Ambassador James Warlick, former U.S. co-chair of the OSCE Minsk Group. See you soon.